Welcome back to Canadian Justice, where we're discussing government expropriation and property rights. Now, Malcolm, if the Supreme Court in this Annapolis case broadens the test for de facto expropriation, making it easier to claim than it currently is, what will this mean for cities and other levels of government in the future? Are they going to need to conduct themselves differently?
Well, I think in the vast majority of good faith zoning cases, um, this doctrine won't apply. If you're talking about simply restricting uses while leaving an owner with a meaningful set of options, that's not a de facto expropriation. If there's a broadening of the test, if you sort of take away or diminish that beneficial interest requirement, if you open up the reasonable use standard, it does mean that where a municipality or some other government body regulates to such a degree that there are no reasonable uses left, in our view, that should be assessed largely by whether there's economic value remaining, then that means there's an entitlement to compensation. It doesn't mean the government body can't do it. It just means that if they're going to fundamentally deprive an owner of the benefits of their property rights, they should pay for it. Either conduct a full formal expropriation with the entitlement to compensation, or pay the compensation that's applicable at common law. So all it means is that in these cases of extreme impacts on an owner's rights, the government body will have to pay for it.
So just very briefly, Malcolm, how common is it for governments to engage in de facto expropriations? And is this something that is rare in Canada?
It's sort of hard to assess that, in part because the CPR test was so restrictive that property owners really stopped bringing claims because the claims seemed doomed from the outset on that really high bar the Supreme Court set in 2006 in the CPR case. I will say I don't think this is an everyday occurrence. I think that property rights are still regarded as generally important, not just by courts and sort of bodies like the CCF, but more generally. I think municipalities try to avoid having impacts that are this extreme on parties. But it does happen, and there have been cases brought, and there are other cases where parties don't bother litigating, where an owner has been fundamentally deprived of the rights of ownership. And so I think this does happen, and it's important to have this protection in place.
Well, it'll be interesting to see if the test changed, what does happen. Joanna, this is one of a number of cases that the CCF has done about property rights in Canada. What are some of the other cases that you've done on this particular topic?
Yeah, so the CCF represented the Rileys, which were a husband and wife that owned properties which they rented out at below market rates to help people who were impoverished. And the government first took control and allowed their properties to fall into disrepair, then permanently seized them on the grounds that some of the tenants' rents had been paid with the proceeds of crime, even though there was no evidence of that. The state just merely assumed that and seized these, very valuable properties. And then more recently, just last year, the CCF intervened at the Ontario Court of Appeal in a case called Norwood Estate. And this was a matter where the court approved a forced settlement between the estate of a deceased and his mother, who alleged to have a claim to the portion of the home. And this was before any determination was made about whether the home constituted proceeds of crime.
So those are cases that relate to a different area of law called civil forfeiture, which is different from expropriation, but certainly has a really significant impact on property rights. And it's a fascinating area of law. Both of these are really fascinating. Joanna Barron from the Canadian Constitution Foundation, Malcolm Lavoie from Miller Thomson. I want to thank you both so much for coming on today. This is a really fascinating discussion about an area of law that I really love, and I hope our viewers enjoyed it.